Thunder rolled across the sky as rain turned the dirt path to mud. Lena crouched on the stairs, breath shallow, eyes wide, listening. Down in the yard, Axel's figure emerged, damp and steadfast, refusing to cower even as Richard's shadow fell over him. She had known her father was cruel at times, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. Axel's stance was unwavering, muscles tense, growl low and precise. Lena's chest ached, not just for the dog, but for the silent promise of her mother, the warmth she had once felt in this very home. Axel had always been more than a dog. He was a witness, a shield, a guardian of their hearts. And tonight, Lena knew, everything would change. She had to protect him, no matter the cost, because the line between love and loss had never felt so thin. The sun had already dipped behind the barren hills, leaving the old farmhouse in a wash of dying amber light. Its walls were grey with age, scarred by years of neglect, the wooden beams groaning softly each time the wind pressed against them. Inside, the air was thick with the stale scent of tobacco and spilled whiskey, a heaviness that clung to the curtains and seeped into the floorboards. The kitchen, once the warm heart of the house, had become a place of silence and dread. 6-year-old Lena moved carefully across the room, her small hands clutching a chipped porcelain plate. The plate had once belonged to her mother. She remembered faintly the nights when laughter and the smell of fresh bread filled these same walls. Now it was only her father's heavy boots pacing the floor, and the silence between his words, sharp and threatening. Her hands trembled as she tried to place the plate onto the counter. Maybe it was the uneven surface, maybe her own fear, but the porcelain slipped. For a brief heartbeat, she thought she could catch it, but it fell. The crash split the silence like a gunshot. Shards scattered across the wooden floor, bright white against the darkness. Lena froze, her breath caught in her chest. A scream rose in her throat, but never came out. Instead, she pressed her back against the wall, as though she could melt into it, disappear, become invisible. From the other room came the sound of a chair scraping violently against the floor. Heavy footsteps thundered toward her, each one a drumbeat of dread. The doorframe filled with the shadow of her father. Richard Hale was not a tall man, but grief and bitterness had twisted his features, making him seem larger, darker, more imposing. His shirt hung open at the collar, and his eyes, once warm brown, now dulled by whiskey and failure, were bloodshot and blazing. "What did you do?" His voice was gravel dragged across stone. Lena tried to speak, but only a whisper came out. It was an accident." Richard's gaze fell to the shards on the floor. His jaw tightened. "That plate was your mother's." Her throat tightened. She wanted to say she knew, that she remembered her mother's hands serving soup with that very dish, her soft humming in the background. But the words stuck, choked by fear. Richard's hand went to his belt. The leather hissed as it slid free from its loops, the sound slicing the air more painfully than any strike could. Lena flinched at the sound alone, curling in on herself in the corner. She buried her face in her small hands as though the darkness between her palms could shield her from what was coming. "Nothing but trouble," Richard muttered, his voice rising into a roar. "Can't you do a single thing right?" He raised the belt high. For a moment, the whole house seemed to hold its breath. The old clock in the hallway ticked once, twice. Lena's heartbeat pounded in her ears, so loud she thought the walls would hear it. She waited for the leather to fall, for the sting across her skin, for the shame that always followed. But then, a sound broke through the charged silence. Not Richard's voice, not Lena's muffled sobs. A growl, low, guttural, rolling like distant thunder. Richard froze. the belt suspended in mid-air. His head turned toward the doorway behind him. And there he was. Axel. The German shepherd filled the frame like a storm-given shape, massive, muscled, his black and tan coat glistening even in the dim light. His ears were rigid, his chest heaving, teeth bared in a snarl that vibrated through the room. His eyes, sharp, amber, unblinking, locked on Richard. For a long moment, man and dog stared at each other. Richard's hand trembled, still clutching the belt, but his posture shifted ever so slightly. He had seen those eyes before, not here in this crumbling house, but years ago, under the harsh light of patrols, when Axel had been his partner. A canine officer trained to protect, to serve, to obey. But the gaze before him now was not obedience. It was defiance. Axel. Richard's voice faltered, barely more than a whisper. The dog took a step forward, his paws heavy on the floorboards. The growl deepened. His body was a shield, placing himself directly between Richard and Lena. Lena lifted her face, stunned. Tears clung to her lashes, but through them she saw Axel, steady, unyielding, an immovable wall of protection. Her tiny hands clutched her chest, and for the first time in so long, a fragile thread of hope stirred. Richard's rage quivered on the edge of collapse. The belt hung loose in his grip, useless now. He cursed under his breath, stepping back. The leather strap fell limp to his side. "Damn dog," he muttered, his voice shaking more from fear than fury. "Maybe I should have gotten rid of you years ago." The words stabbed through Lena, but Axel only stood firmer, his growl a constant warning. Richard's glare darted between his daughter and the animal. His face was a storm of shame, grief, and drunken anger, but he turned abruptly, storming down the hall. The belt dragged against the floor as he disappeared into the shadows, muttering about selling the dog to the first man who'd take him. The house fell silent again, save for the echo of Lena's ragged breaths. Axel turned, the growl fading into a soft whine. He stepped toward her, lowering his massive head. She reached trembling fingers out, touching the warm fur between his ears. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you." Axel licked her tear-streaked cheek, his eyes steady and calm now. For the first time in years, she felt safe, if only for a moment. And as she buried her face into Axel's neck, the dog's gaze followed the dark hallway where Richard had vanished. His amber eyes narrowed, as if he understood more than anyone would believe. He would not let harm come to her again. The belt cut a shallow arc through the kitchen air, the leather whispering as it came down. Richard's hand was already in motion, anger doing what grief had taught it, when the doorway seemed to breathe. A weight hit the threshold. Claws found wood. A body moved with a speed that belonged to other nights in other rooms, the kind with radios crackling and boots on wet pavement. The German shepherd burst into the kitchen like a muscle flexed by fate itself. Axel. He crossed the room in 3 strides, a low thunder rolling in his chest. The belt halted mid-air. Richard's arm hung there, unsure what to do with its own momentum. The dog's shoulders were square and high, fur lifted in a dark ridge along the spine, tail low and still. He didn't bark. He didn't need to. The sound he made was deeper than noise. It was a boundary. Axel planted himself between Lena and the raised hand. The kitchen light caught the copper thread in his eyes. Amber, keen, old. He angled his body just enough to shield the child completely, but left his gaze on the man who had once been something like a partner. Lena pressed back against the wall, hands to her mouth, breath shivering. She watched the dog from the narrow hallway of her fingers. He was near enough that she could feel the heat of him, the steady rise and fall of breath that said, "I am here." Richard's grip loosened, then clenched again. He took half a step forward. The growl deepened. Not a shout, not a snarl wild with panic, but a measured warning that came from training and something older than training, the knowledge of when a line is crossed. "Axel," Richard said, his voice roughened, as if it had been left in the rain. The name carried the weight of old nights, commands bitten clean through wind. Heel, down, watch, out. The dog's ears flicked at the sound, acknowledging it, then settled back to the man's face. He did not break eye contact. For a breath, Richard wasn't in that dim kitchen. He was on a gravel lot behind a city precinct, dawn chalking the sky pale while a younger man, himself, jogged a figure 8, the dog at his knee, precise as a metronome. He remembered Axel's first hold, the way he released on a single word. He remembered trust as a simple thing. You go forward, I go with you. You fall, I stand. He also remembered the day after the funeral, how the leash had felt like accusation in his palm. He'd stopped training, stopped walking, stopped more than that. And the dog, patient as weather, had waited. Now Axel's patience ended where the child began. Richard's jaw moved once, twice, as if to bite back something that wasn't language. The belt drooped. He took in the scene with a soldier's rapid inventory. 6 feet away, German shepherd at a protective stance. Weight forward, head level, eyes steady, child behind cover. He recognized the stance. He'd taught it. He'd praised it. He'd relied on it when doors opened into rooms that smelled like fear. "Stand down," he said, words automatic. No command voice, just a man stumbling over a habit. Axel did not move. Instead, he shifted a fraction, just enough to widen his shield. His left forepaw slid forward, nails ticked on the floor. A small, exact adjustment that turned his body into a wall. The growl receded to a vibration. If a stranger had wandered in, they might have missed it. Richard did not. He felt it through the floorboards, the way you feel a train before you hear it. Lena, drawn by the strange quiet, let her hands drop a little. She could see the line where the dog met the man. Axel's fur along the neck lay smooth now, as if the decision had been made and no more show was needed. The room watched itself breathe. Richard's eyes went to the belt, to the child, back to the dog. He wasn't drunk enough to mistake what stood in front of him. Training let him read posture better than words. Axel's mouth was closed, lips still. No flash of teeth now. He was not escalating. He was declaring. An old thing spoke there. A vow taken without ceremony, re-sworn with every steady breath. Mine to guard. "You were mine," Richard said, and it was not an accusation. It sounded like a confession spoken to a church with no pews, only a scarred kitchen table and a child's small sandals beside a loosened knot of apron string. "You were mine, and now..." Axel's ear flicked again. The old cadence wanted to rise. Axel Platz. But the words felt wrong in Richard's mouth. He had taught obedience, and the dog had given it. Tonight, the truth was different. The dog had chosen. Something cramped in Richard's chest at that. It was small, the size of a fist, the size of a fallen plate. He hated how it felt like shame. He hated that it also felt like relief. He lowered the belt another inch. The leather brushed his thigh, a whisper of the life he had made, and the one that had been made for him. A draft wandered in from the back hall, carrying a memory smell. Rain, somewhere out beyond the fields, iron and green. The house moaned in its old bones. The clock in the hall went on marking time, oblivious. A fly buzzed uselessly at the window screen. Small, ordinary noises pooled at the edges of the moment, as if the room itself didn't know what to do with the quiet. Lena reached, slow as a leaf falling, and found Axel's ruff. Her fingers threaded into the thick fur. She did not pull, did not cling. She only touched, like a blind person mapping a doorway. Under her palm, the dog was solid, a heat she could trust. She felt him breathe, counted it, 1, 2, 3, and matched her lungs to his until the flutter in her chest eased. Axel's head tilted a fraction back toward her, checking. His eyes never left the man. "Back off," Richard muttered, but it lacked gasoline. The words came out flat, burned empty. His shoulders slumped an inch. He let the belt hang at his side, dead weight now. He looked smaller, all at once, as if the rage had been the scaffolding and someone had taken it down. Without it, you could see the man who had once whistled on the way in from the yard. The man who carried a newborn down a dark hall while whispering to a dog at heel, "Quiet now. Easy." Axel moved again. No lunge, no show. He simply took that last half step that put his chest almost against Richard's shin, close enough that the man would have to touch him to pass. The shepherd stood so still, he might have been carved there. But he was a live thing, a listening thing. The message was simple enough to read without words. This far, no farther. Richard's hand, the one that had lifted the belt, hovered in space as if it had forgotten its purpose. It hung there, palm open, then closed into a fist, then opened again, like a man arguing with himself in semaphore. At last he ran it over his face and let out a breath that sounded old. "Fine," he said to the air, to the ceiling, to the child hidden in the dog's shadow. "Fine." The belt slid through his fingers and fell to the floor with an honest thud. The sound made Lena flinch, but Axel didn't so much as blink. Richard looked at the two of them and felt, in a dim way, that he had arrived at a door. He didn't know yet whether he would open it or set it on fire. He took a step back. The dog did not follow. He took another. The dog stayed, rooted to the small life behind him. Richard's gaze met Axel's once more, and under the steady amber, he saw something that stung. Recognition of the man he had been and the man he was. "Do what you want," he said, though the words tasted like a lie. "Guard her, then." In the narrow quiet that followed, Lena's breath sounded like paper turned in a book. She leaned her forehead a moment into Axel's shoulder, the way a child prays when she doesn't know the words. The shepherd flicked his tail once, barely, a punctuation you could miss if you weren't looking. Richard was looking. He felt the mark of it all the same. He retreated to the doorway, paused there, and glanced back. The lamp threw a small halo on the table, caught the shine on a single shard of plate like a lonely star. Beyond it stood the dog, the child, the line he would not cross again without paying a price. For a heartbeat, remorse lifted its head in him. He set his jaw against it and looked away. Axel did not move until the man's shadow left the wall. He stood there listening to the house, the dwindling footfalls, the clink of a bottle somewhere deeper in the dark, the tired hinge of a door giving up and closing. Only then did he huff out a breath and lower himself an inch. Not surrender, just ease, so the child would know the danger had passed for now. He let her small hand remain at his neck. He let her heart beat slow against his side. Outside, wind moved through the dry grass and carried the scent of rain closer. Inside, a dog held his ground while a house learned how to breathe again. The first line had been drawn. It made no sound, no speech. It only stood in a kitchen with a child behind it and looked a broken man in the eye. Richard's boots thundered down the hallway, each step heavy with rage. The door slammed somewhere in the house, rattling the cracked glass of the kitchen window. His voice trailed behind him, muttered curses tangled with the raw edge of whiskey. Damn mutt. Worthless. I'll sell him yet. You'll see. The words bled into the silence, but their venom lingered. The farmhouse settled into an uneasy stillness. The shattered plate still glistened across the floor, white shards catching the dull light like broken teeth. The belt lay abandoned where it had fallen, the leather twisted in a coil, harmless now. But Lena couldn't take her eyes off it. Even still, it carried the memory of what almost was. Her small body trembled. She hugged her knees to her chest, afraid to move, as if the wrong breath would bring him storming back. Then she felt it. Warmth pressed against her shoulder, steady and solid. She turned. Axel. The German shepherd lowered his great head, nudging her gently with his muzzle. His eyes, still burning with the echo of defiance, softened when they fell on her. The growl that had filled the room moments ago was gone, replaced by a sound softer than a sigh. His presence filled the kitchen not with fear, but with something Lena had nearly forgotten: safety. Her small hands reached instinctively for his fur, clutching at the thick ruff around his neck. "Thank you," she whispered, the words cracked by tears. "Thank you, Axel." She buried her face against him, the dog's coat damp with sweat and dust. For a long moment, she stayed there, breathing him in. The smell was warm, earthy, alive. Her sobs broke into the silence, but this time, there was no shame in them. They were the sound of a child being held, even if the arms were not human. Axel leaned into her, his body forming a wall between her and the rest of the room. His ears flicked, listening to the house, to the distant creak of floorboards as Richard stomped about, still muttering to himself. But his eyes stayed on the hallway where the man had vanished. They were sharp, knowing, unblinking. Lena followed his gaze. She shivered, because in those amber eyes was something she couldn't explain. Not just instinct, not just loyalty. Something deeper. Like the dog knew what her father was capable of, and what storms still waited beyond tonight. The farmhouse groaned under a gust of wind outside. A shutter banged loosely against the siding, and somewhere in the distance an owl called into the night. The sounds made Lena flinch, but Axel didn't stir. He stood tall, vigilant, as though promising her that nothing, not even the darkness, would cross his line. Finally, the heaviness in her chest loosened enough for her to breathe. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, still clutching Axel with the other. "I'm not scared when you're here," she murmured, her words broken but true. Her gaze drifted to the shards of porcelain scattered across the floor. Once, her mother had set the table with those plates, humming softly as she worked. Tonight, one lay broken beyond repair. Yet Axel, the last piece of her mother's love, still stood whole. She thought of what her father had said: "I'll sell him, and a spike of panic cut through her small chest. "No," she whispered fiercely, more to herself than anyone. "I won't let him." Axel turned his head slightly at her voice, his ears catching the tone. His eyes met hers, steady and calm, as if he understood her vow. He lowered his head again, resting it lightly against her lap, giving her the weight of his trust. Minutes blurred into an hour. The house quieted, Richard's angry muttering fading into the heavy silence of drunken sleep. Still, Lena didn't move from her place on the kitchen floor. Axel stayed with her, unblinking, every muscle relaxed yet ready. She thought of her mother then. How different this house had felt with her laughter in it. How Axel had once followed her mother everywhere, his steps light, his ears always tuned to her voice. She wondered if her mother had known, truly known, that Axel would stay, even when she was gone. A child's mind doesn't hold on to reason in such moments. It holds on to pictures. And Lena saw one now. Axel standing in the kitchen doorway, amber eyes like two small lanterns, holding back the dark. For the first time since her mother's death, Lena felt something that had almost left her entirely. Hope. She shifted closer, curling against his side, her small hand still tangled in his fur. Axel exhaled, a long, steady breath that ruffled the strands of her hair. She closed her eyes. The farmhouse still loomed with its shadows, but the fear had retreated, held at bay by a silent guardian who would not leave her side. And as sleep finally tugged at her weary body, Axel's eyes remained open. They followed the hallway, where Richard had disappeared, sharp and unyielding. He had seen the man at his worst. He knew the shape of his rage. But he also knew this. The child was his now, his to protect, his guard. Outside, the night deepened. The owl called again. The wind pressed at the old house. But inside, in that broken kitchen, a new line had been drawn. And it was written not in words, but in silence, in the gaze of a dog who understood more than anyone dared believe. The storm within the walls would not end tonight. Richard's anger was not gone, only sleeping. But Axel had shown his defiance, and the child had felt safety bloom for the first time in years. It was only the beginning. The morning sun crept over the horizon in thin, reluctant beams, spilling pale gold across the fields that once promised life, but now lay heavy with neglect. The farmhouse stood in their midst like an abandoned sentinel, its paint long peeled, windows dulled with dust, and roof sagging under years of weather and silence. Inside, the walls still hummed with the memory of last night's storm, not of rain, but of words, threats, and the sharp edge of leather raised in anger. Richard had left early, his boots pounding across the porch, his muttered curses fading into the growl of his old truck as it rattled down the dirt road toward town. The house exhaled when he was gone. Silence settled, but it was a silence Lena never trusted. It was too thin, too fragile, as though his shadow lingered even when his body did not. At 6 years old, Lena's world was measured by the weight of chores too large for her small frame. A bucket, nearly as heavy as she was. A broom that dragged across the floor more than it swept. A kettle she could barely lift to the stove. Her father left lists scratched in his rough handwriting on scraps of paper. Chop wood, sweep floors, wash, collect eggs. None of them were the tasks of a child, but they had become her life. She moved through the kitchen with bare feet, stepping carefully around the shard she hadn't been able to clean last night, the remnant of her mother's plate. She had hidden the belt under a chair, afraid even of its presence on the floor. The air still smelled faintly of spilled liquor and ash. Her hands shook as she poured water into a dented tin cup. The house was never kind. It breathed in sighs of wood settling, groans of nails loosening in their boards. Every sound seemed to hold menace. She could never truly rest inside these walls. Even with her father gone, every corner carried his presence. His anger seemed to cling to the curtains, soak into the old rugs, wait in the shadows like a coiled snake. But outside was different. The moment Lena stepped through the door, the air shifted. The cold grass was wet with dew and painted her feet dark green as she crossed the yard. Birds called from the trees beyond the fence. The world smelled of damp earth and the faint sweetness of clover. The farmhouse loomed behind her like a prison, but beyond it stretched space wide enough for her lungs to open. She clutched a small bundle in her arms, crusts of bread too hard for her father's teeth, scraps of potato skins, a few pieces of chicken bone she had tucked away from last night's dinner. To anyone else, it was trash. To her, it was a treasure. She looked over her shoulder once, twice. The dirt road was empty, the horizon still and quiet. No sign of the truck's return. Then, with the caution of someone used to secrecy, she darted across the yard, past the sagging barn door, and toward the stable. The stable was a different kind of silence. Dust floated like slow-moving stars in the slanted beams of morning light. The smell of hay and old wood wrapped around her, softer than anything in the house. And there, waiting in the half-light, was Axel. The German shepherd lifted his head the moment she appeared. His ears pricked, and his tail gave a single thump against the ground. He didn't move at first, as though confirming that it was really her, and not the man whose shadow usually darkened the doorway. Then he rose, slow and steady, his eyes bright with recognition. "Shh," Lena whispered, pressing a finger to her lips, as though afraid even the walls might hear. "It's just me." Axel padded forward, his paws soundless on the hay-strewn floor. He stopped just in front of her, lowering his head so that his nose brushed her hands. She opened the bundle, holding out the scraps with trembling fingers. The dog's eyes softened, and he took the bread crust gently from her palm, careful not to scrape her skin. A small giggle escaped her. The sound startled her. It felt foreign, like sunlight in a house too long kept in shadow. She clapped her hand over her mouth, wide-eyed, but Axel only tilted his head, chewing slowly, watching her with something that felt uncannily like understanding. "You have to eat," she whispered, crouching beside him. "Daddy doesn't care if you do, but I do. You saved me last night, remember, so now I'll take care of you." The German shepherd finished the bread, then nudged her shoulder with his nose, as though answering. Lena sat down fully, her back against the stall wall, and Axel pressed close, his warm body against her thin frame. For the first time since waking, she felt the knot in her chest ease. The contrast between her two worlds weighed heavy in her small heart. In the house, fear, silence, the constant ache of waiting for anger to strike. Out here, the steady rhythm of Axel's breathing, the chirp of sparrows in the rafters, the feeling that she was not alone. She closed her eyes, letting her fingers trace the fur at his neck. "I wish Mama was here," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "But you're here. And I think maybe she wanted it that way. Maybe that's why you stayed." Axel leaned into her, a silent reply. The sound of his steady breath filled the space between her words, as comforting as a lullaby. Lena stayed there until the morning grew brighter, until the sun climbed higher and spilled into the stable. But even as the light touched her face, a shadow lingered in her thoughts. Her father's words from the night before still clung to her ears. "I'll sell him yet." Her small fingers tightened in Axel's fur. She didn't know how, she didn't know when, but something in her heart whispered that she would not let that happen. Not to him, not to the only safe place she had left. For now, though, she stayed quiet, pressing her cheek against his neck, listening to the world outside the farmhouse walls, the world where fear did not rule. And in the silence of the stable, the bond between a child and her guardian grew stronger, root by root, like something ancient pushing up from the soil, unseen but unbreakable. The stable smelled of hay, wood dust, and the faint sweetness of earth damp from morning dew. Light filtered through the slats in thin stripes, painting the straw in uneven patches of gold. Lena sat cross-legged on the ground, her small frame half hidden in the shadows. In her hands she cradled the last of the scraps she had saved, 2 softened potato peels, a crust of bread, and a sliver of chicken no bigger than her thumb. Axel sat patiently before her, his body tall and still, ears flicked forward, eyes warm and steady. He didn't lunge for the food the way other dogs might. He waited. Lena smiled faintly at that. Such patience, as if he knew the offering was more than food. She stretched out her hand, palm trembling a little. "Here, boy," she whispered. "You need this more than I do." The German shepherd lowered his head and took the bread with the gentlest precision, his rough tongue brushing her skin. Lena's heart fluttered at the touch. To anyone else, it might have been an ordinary exchange. But for her, it was holy. A ritual, a silent vow that she could still give something, even when her father's house offered her nothing but fear. She leaned back against the wooden wall of the stall and let out a sigh that seemed too heavy for a 6-year-old. "Mama used to sit here with you, didn't she?" she asked softly, her words not really seeking an answer. "I remember her humming. She always smelled like lavender when she brushed your fur." Axel tilted his head slightly, one ear higher than the other. He blinked slowly, then stepped closer until his chest brushed her knees. Lena reached up with both hands, sinking her fingers deep into the thick fur around his neck. "I miss her every day," she confessed. "It's like the house is empty, even when Daddy's there, maybe especially when he's there." Her voice broke into a whisper. "He doesn't smile anymore. He doesn't laugh. He just yells. And when he looks at me, it's like he wishes I wasn't there." Axel exhaled heavily, lowering himself onto the straw beside her. The warmth of his body spread into her legs. He stretched one paw toward her, as though bridging the distance. When she leaned forward, he rested his massive head gently in her lap. Lena froze for a moment. Her breath caught, then let a small, shaky laugh escape. "You really do listen, don't you?" she whispered. "You don't talk back. You don't get angry. You just stay." Her tiny hands stroked his ears, smoothing the fur the way her mother once had. "Sometimes I think if I talk to you long enough, Mama will hear me too," she murmured. "Like maybe you carry my words to her somehow." The dog's amber eyes closed halfway, a look of contentment, but the faint twitch of his ear told her he heard every syllable. His breath rose and fell steadily against her leg, a rhythm that soothed the pounding of her heart. "Do you know what he said last night?" Lena asked, her words trembling. "He said he was going to sell you, just like that, like you were nothing but a chair he didn't want anymore." Her throat tightened. "But you're not nothing. You're all I have left." Axel lifted his head at her quivering tone and nudged her chin with his nose. The touch was firm, but tender, as though he were insisting she look at him. She met his gaze. It was steady, unwavering, filled with something she didn't know how to name. Comfort. Strength. Promise. She pressed her forehead against his, closing her eyes. "You're the only one who listens," she whispered, her tears slipping down her cheeks and dampening his fur. "When I'm scared, when I'm lonely, when the house feels too big and too dark, you're there. Always there." The stable seemed to lean in, holding the moment. Outside, the breeze rustled through the tall grass. A bird called, and the old wood creaked. But inside, there was only the hush of their shared silence. Lena reached into the pocket of her faded dress and pulled out a small treasure, a ribbon, frayed at the ends, once tied in her mother's hair. She had hidden it for weeks, afraid her father might throw it away. She held it up for Axel to see. "This is hers. When I wear it, I feel like she's close." She tied the ribbon loosely around Axel's collar, her small fingers fumbling with the knot. "Now you'll carry her too." The dog sat still, not resisting. When she stepped back to look, the sight nearly undid her. This great, loyal animal, carrying the simplest token of her mother's love like a badge of honor. Her lip trembled, and she hugged him fiercely, burying her face in his fur. "I think Mama chose you," she said into the thick ruff of his neck. "She knew I'd need you. Maybe that's why you never left, even when everything else did." Axel shifted, pressing his body closer, laying his head once more in her lap. His breathing was slow, a grounding heartbeat against the chaos of her days. She stroked him again and again, until her hands stilled, resting there like roots anchoring her to this fragile moment of peace. For a while, Lena just sat in the hush, talking about little things, how the morning light looked through the cracks in the barn, how the hens had pecked at her dress, how the wind made the fields bend like waves in the sea. And Axel listened, as though every word was worthy of keeping. When her voice finally grew tired, she rested her cheek on his head, eyes fluttering closed. "You're my best friend," she whispered sleepily. "The only one who really knows me." The dog did not move. He didn't need to. His presence said everything. "I'm here. I will not leave you. Not now. Not ever." And in that small stable, on a morning that had begun with chores too heavy for her shoulders, Lena found what the farmhouse could never give her: safety, love, and a place where her voice mattered. It was the beginning of something more than survival. It was the beginning of trust. The attic had always felt like a forbidden place. Lena had passed by the narrow staircase 100 times, the wooden steps creaking like tired bones, but Richard never allowed her to climb. "Nothing up there but junk," he had once barked. Yet junk didn't frighten him. Memories did. That afternoon, with her father gone to town and Axel resting in the shade of the stable, Lena dared to climb. Each step groaned under her light frame, the sound magnified in the hushed house. Dust swirled in lazy spirals as her hand clung to the railing, her heart hammering as if she were trespassing into a sacred temple. At the top, the air grew heavier, thick with the smell of old wood, mildew, and something faintly sweet, like lavender long faded. A single small window let in a slant of pale light, illuminating motes of dust that drifted like stars in a forgotten sky. Lena hesitated, then stepped into the room, her bare feet crunching against scattered straw and forgotten papers. The attic was filled with relics: a broken rocking chair, boxes of rusted tools, a cradle with one missing leg. And in the farthest corner, half hidden under a moth-eaten quilt, sat a wooden chest. Its edges were worn smooth with age, and carved into its lid was a faded pattern of vines, their once delicate etching now blurred by dust. Something in Lena's chest tightened. She didn't know why, but she felt drawn to it. Kneeling, she brushed the quilt away, coughing as dust rose in a cloud. Her small hands traced the carvings, and she felt warmth, as if the wood remembered the touch of gentler fingers. With effort, she lifted the lid. The hinges groaned, protesting like old voices woken from sleep. And there, in the dim light, lay the remnants of a life she thought had been lost. The first thing she saw was a scarf, soft, pale blue, folded neatly despite the years. She lifted it to her face. The fabric still carried a whisper of her mother's scent, faint lavender mixed with something warm, like sunlight on linen. The smell broke her. Tears spilled freely as she pressed the scarf against her cheeks, her shoulders shaking with the force of memory. "Mama," she whispered. Beneath the scarf were photographs, their edges curled, their black and white tones faded. She picked up one with trembling fingers. Her mother, Eleanor, smiled brightly at the camera, her arm around Richard in the days before bitterness had carved his face into stone. And at their feet, sitting proud, was Axel. His coat gleamed, his ears stood tall, his eyes alive with focus. Lena's breath caught. Axel looked younger, but unmistakable. He wasn't just the dog in the yard. He had been part of her family long before she had even understood what loyalty meant. Another photo showed him standing beside men in uniforms, a badge glinting on his collar. Soldiers, maybe police, Lena wasn't sure. All she knew was the pride in her mother's smile as she stood with Axel, as though the dog wasn't just theirs, but something greater. Her fingers brushed over one final treasure, a leather-bound journal. Its cover was worn, the edges frayed, but the pages smelled faintly of ink and lavender. Her mother's handwriting filled the first page in neat, elegant strokes. "To my daughter, in case I cannot tell you myself, this is the story of our guardian." Lena's throat tightened. She flipped through the pages, the words alive with a voice she had longed for every night since her mother's passing. Entry after entry spoke of Axel, not as a pet, but as a partner. Axel served bravely in the K9 unit. He saved lives when others could not. He learned to hear what men could not say, to see what men would not see. But more than that, he is a soul that chooses his family. When Richard brought him home, I knew immediately he was meant to guard us. Lena's small fingers trembled as she traced the words. She could see it now. Axel wasn't simply staying out of duty or habit. He had been chosen, perhaps even destined, to be with them. Further along in the journal, her mother had written of nights when Axel sat at her bedside during illness, refusing to leave even when ordered. Of times when he alerted her to dangers on the farm, barking long before storms broke or strangers arrived. "He knows things," Eleanor had written. "He carries a wisdom older than any training could give." The child's tears fell onto the page, smudging the ink. She hugged the journal to her chest, the scarf still draped around her shoulders. Her mother's words were no longer just memory. They were alive, reaching across time to remind her she was not alone. With the photographs spread around her like scattered pieces of the past, Lena whispered aloud, "You were a hero, Axel. Mama knew. She trusted you. And now, I know too." A sound stirred behind her, soft claws on wood. She turned quickly. At the top of the stairs stood Axel, his silhouette framed by the dusty light from the window. His amber eyes fixed on her, unblinking, as though he had followed her scent, her fear, her need. "Look," Lena whispered, her small voice breaking with awe. She held up the photo with trembling hands. "That's you. With Mama. She wrote about you." Axel stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, until his head was level with the photograph. His nose brushed the image, his ears flicked. For a heartbeat, Lena swore his eyes softened with recognition, as though the memories lived within him too. She pressed the journal open on her lap and read aloud. "Axel is not just an animal. He is a guardian, and when the time comes, he will protect what I cannot." The words echoed in the quiet attic, powerful as a promise. Axel lowered himself beside her, pressing close. His great head rested on her knee, his eyes lifting to meet hers. For the first time in her 6 fragile years, Lena felt the thread connecting past and present, the hand of her mother, the loyalty of her dog, and her own fragile courage woven together. She stroked his ears, her voice trembling with conviction. "You're not just mine. You're ours. Mama's too. And I'll never let him take you away." The attic held its breath, as though listening. Outside, a crow cawed in the distance, and the wind stirred the dust in golden swirls. Within those walls, a child and her guardian sat surrounded by the echoes of a mother's love, and a vow unspoken but undeniable passed between them. Whatever storms were coming, they would face them together. The afternoon light slanted through the attic window in faded stripes, falling across the open journal resting in Lena's lap. She had carried it down from the attic as if it were something sacred, holding it tight against her chest with both hands, her fingers smudged with dust and ink. Now, sitting cross-legged on the floor near the small hearth, she opened it carefully, like a fragile treasure that might crumble if she breathed too hard. The leather cover crackled faintly as she turned the first real entry. Her mother's handwriting, delicate loops and precise strokes, spread across the page in brown ink. Even the letters felt alive, as if her mother's hand lingered in them, whispering through the years. October 14th, Axel's first deployment. I've never seen such focus in an animal. He moves like he understands orders before they're given, like he hears the thoughts in our voices before we speak them. He isn't just trained, he's present, watching, choosing. Lena's lips moved silently as she traced each word with her finger. She didn't understand every phrase, deployment, unit, command, but she felt their weight. She could see Axel in the words, alert, powerful, a shadow moving beside soldiers. The idea filled her with awe. She flipped to the next page. November 3rd. Tonight, Axel stopped Richard from walking straight into danger. A suspect had hidden a knife. Axel saw it before anyone else did. He stepped between, teeth bared, forcing the man to drop the blade. Richard owes his life to him, though he won't admit it out loud. I saw it in his eyes. The shock, the gratitude. He knows. Lena gasped softly. Her father, this same man who now carried anger like a weapon, had once been protected by Axel too. She tried to imagine it. Her father younger, Axel strong and unyielding at his side. For a moment, the image softened something inside her, until she remembered his words about selling the dog. Her small hands gripped the journal tighter. She turned the pages slowly, afraid to miss anything. Each entry painted Axel not as a pet, but as a partner. January 22nd. The blizzard closed the highway. We thought the family in the car was lost, but Axel kept pulling at the leash, dragging us through drifts higher than his shoulders. He led us straight to them, 2 parents, a baby wrapped in blankets. If not for him, they would have frozen. I don't know how he knew, but he did. Lena's eyes filled with tears. She pressed her cheek against Axel's side. He was lying beside her now, his breathing steady, his head heavy on his paws. He looked almost ordinary, like any dog resting at his child's side. But the words in the journal told her the truth. He was extraordinary. She turned another page, and there her mother had written a line in darker ink, underlined twice. "This dog is not just an animal. He is a guardian." The words stole Lena's breath. She read them again and again, her lips moving, her voice trembling. "He is a guardian." She looked down at Axel, and in that moment she believed it with all her heart. She remembered the way he had burst into the kitchen, standing between her and the belt, his growl freezing Richard in place. She remembered the way he had rested his head in her lap when she whispered her secrets. And now she knew. It wasn't chance. It was who he was. It was who he had always been. Her mother's words seemed to fill the room, wrapping around her like the lavender-scented scarf she had found in the chest. The farmhouse felt less empty. For the first time in years, Lena felt her mother close, not as a memory that hurt, but as a presence that healed. She whispered into the quiet, her hand stroking Axel's fur. "Mama knew. She knew you'd be here for me." Axel shifted, lifting his head to meet her gaze. His amber eyes locked on hers, deep and knowing. For a moment, Lena almost believed he understood every word on the page. She held the journal up as though showing him. "She called you a guardian," she said softly. "That means you're mine. You'll keep me safe, won't you?" The German shepherd leaned forward and nudged her chin with his nose. A quiet answer, as sure as any spoken vow. Lena's tears spilled freely, but they weren't only tears of sorrow. They were something else, something like relief, something like hope. She clutched the journal to her chest, pressing the leather against her small heart. "Mama's still here," she whispered. "Through you. Through her words. I can feel her again." Outside, the wind rustled against the farmhouse walls, carrying the faint scent of rain. But inside, in that fragile space, carved from silence and memory, a little girl, a loyal dog, and the echoes of a mother's love created a sanctuary. Lena wiped her face with the back of her sleeve and turned another page, ready to read more. She wasn't just reading a story. She was uncovering a legacy. And with every word, her bond with Axel deepened, woven tighter by the threads her mother had left behind. The journal lay open on the floorboards, its inked words still echoing in Lena's mind like whispers from a voice she thought she'd lost forever. Yet beside it was another treasure. The scattered photographs she had pulled from the chest, faded by time, edges curled, but still holding a life that seemed brighter than the one she knew now. She gathered them carefully, spreading them in a rough circle on the ground, her small hands trembling as though afraid they might dissolve into dust. Axel shifted beside her, his paws brushing the edges of the images, his breath warm and steady, as if standing watch while she explored a world long gone. The first photograph was stiff and grainy, but it held a weight that made Lena's chest ache. Her mother stood there in sunlight, her arm wrapped around Richard's waist. But this Richard was different, his shoulders square, his face lit with something Lena had never seen on him, pride. And at his side, sitting tall and noble, was Axel. His fur shone dark and sleek, his ears alert, eyes sharp, as though he carried a secret no one else could see. Lena traced the outline of Axel's shape with her fingertip. "You were with them. Even before me," she whispered. "You belong to Mama too." Axel's ear flicked, and he lowered his head as if acknowledging her words. She picked up the next photo. This one showed a group of uniformed men, soldiers, their faces hard, their boots caked with dirt, and among them, Axel again. But this time, his stance was fierce, his teeth bared in readiness. One soldier knelt with a hand resting on his back, trusting him. Lena's eyes widened. She could almost hear the shouts, the chaos, the pounding of boots, and yet Axel looked like calm in the storm, a creature made for courage. Her voice softened. "Mama said you saved lives. She wrote it, and I can see it here. You weren't just a dog." She glanced at another image. Her mother crouched in a field of tall grass, one hand holding Axel's collar, the other reaching toward the camera, her smile radiant. Sunlight kissed her hair, her eyes bright with something more than happiness, trust. Beside her, Axel's posture was protective, his body angled slightly forward, as though even in that moment of peace he was guarding her. Tears blurred Lena's vision. She pressed the photo to her chest, rocking slightly. She wasn't alone. She had you. And now, so do I. The room grew quiet, except for the faint creak of the farmhouse beams and the steady rhythm of Axel's breathing. Lena laid out the photos like pieces of a puzzle, each one painting Axel not as background, but as a constant thread in her family's story. There was one where Richard stood in uniform, his hand gripping Axel's leash, but his eyes softer than Lena had ever known. Another where her mother laughed, sitting on a porch step, Axel's massive head resting in her lap. And another still, where baby Lena, just a bundle wrapped in blankets, was cradled in her mother's arms, while Axel sat close, his gaze fixed on the child, watchful, almost solemn. Lena gasped when she saw it. Her tiny self, fragile and unaware, and Axel, already there, already protecting her, before she could even walk. Her lips quivered into the smallest smile. "You've always been here," she whispered. "Always." She looked at Axel now, lying at her side with his ribbon of her mother's hair tied loosely around his collar. She pressed the photo against his fur. "Mama saw you as part of us. Not just a dog, not even just a friend. Your family. You always were." The German shepherd lifted his head and met her eyes. In that gaze, Lena felt a bridge across time. The same look he had given her mother in those photographs. Steady, unwavering, full of quiet devotion. It was as though the dog carried memories not just of his own, but of hers, of theirs, holding them until someone was ready to see. Her small fingers returned to the journal, flipping back and forth between the written words and the captured images. "He is a guardian," her mother had written. And now Lena saw the proof in every faded picture. Her mother had trusted Axel with her life, her family, her daughter's future. The attic, once heavy with dust and shadows, seemed lighter now, alive with echoes. Lena could almost hear her mother's laughter in the photo where she crouched in the grass. She could almost smell her perfume again, caught in the scarf draped around her shoulders, and she could almost feel her presence. Here, in the way Axel leaned close, in the way the photos told a story of a bond that never broke. Lena pressed her forehead to Axel's and whispered through her tears, "You're not just my guardian. You were hers first. She left you for me." Axel let out a low rumble. Not a growl, but something softer, like an ancient echo. His body pressed against hers, his weight solid, unmovable. Lena knew then, this wasn't a chance. This was a legacy. And though the farmhouse below was still filled with fear, though her father's shadow still haunted every corner, here in the circle of old photographs and her mother's words, Lena felt something stronger than fear. She felt belonged. She felt chosen. The photos, once hidden in a dusty chest, were no longer relics of the past. They were proof of a thread unbroken, a story still being written, A story where she and Axel now stood together, carrying forward the legacy of love and loyalty her mother had begun. The night had settled over the farm like a heavy quilt, stitched with threads of silence and the distant hum of crickets. The house, though, was never quiet in Lena's heart. Every creak of the floor, every muffled thud of her father pacing below sent a ripple of unease through her small body. Yet clutched tightly in her arms was the one thing that made her feel braver. The leather-bound journal, warm from her touch, heavy with the weight of her mother's voice. She waited until Richard's steps turned into the uneven rhythm of a man retreating to his bottles. Only then did she slip barefoot down the stairs, her tiny shadow gliding along the wall. Each breath was a prayer that the hinges wouldn't squeal, that the floorboards wouldn't betray her. The back door opened with a whisper, and the night air wrapped around her, cool and damp, carrying the faint smell of hay. The stable loomed just beyond the yard, its wooden frame dark against the silver wash of moonlight. Lena's heart beat faster as she ran across the grass, clutching the journal to her chest. Axel was waiting. She knew he always would be. When she slid open the stable door, the earthy scent of straw and horse leather greeted her. And there he was, Axel, lying in the shadows of his stall, his amber eyes already glowing with recognition. He rose to his feet with a slow, deliberate grace, tail swishing once against the wood as if to say, "I knew you were coming." Lena's voice broke the silence. "I brought something, Axel." Mama's words. She lifted the journal high, almost proudly, before sinking into the straw beside him. The dog lowered himself back down, resting his chest against the ground, paws stretched forward like a sentinel. His head tilted, ears pricked with alertness as Lena opened the book. She began to read, her small voice fragile but steady. March 8th. Axel has a way of listening that humbles me. Today, he sat by Richard's side while reports of danger poured in. He didn't fidget, didn't break his focus. He watched. He listened. When it mattered, he moved first. Sometimes I wonder if he knows Richard better than Richard knows himself. Axel's ears twitched at the sound of his name, and Lena's lips curved into a trembling smile. She reached out to stroke his neck. "See? She was writing about you. She trusted you even then." The dog pressed his head gently against her knee, his eyes never leaving hers. In that gaze, Lena felt something stirring, like recognition, like a memory long buried in fur and bone rising to the surface. She turned the page and continued. June 12th. We were called to the riverbank. A boy had gone missing. Searchers shouted and stumbled, but Axel went straight to the reeds. He pulled the child free, cold but alive. There is no training for what he does. It's instinct. It's devotion. It's something deeper. Lena's voice trembled as she read, picturing it. Axel leaping into cold water, dragging a boy back to life. She lifted her eyes from the page, whispering, "You saved him. Just like you saved me in the kitchen." Axel gave a low sound, not quite a growl, not quite a whine, more like a murmur, a thread of sound that seemed to agree. His great head shifted until it rested against her lap. The pages crackled as she turned them, her small fingers brushing the ink that her mother had laid down with such care. September 2nd. I am convinced Axel carries the memory of every moment he has lived. Tonight he stood at the window before the storm arrived, restless, alert, as if he could hear thunder beyond the horizon. I've started to believe he isn't just guarding our home. He is carrying it. Its past, its present, and perhaps even its future. Lena stopped, her breath catching. She touched Axel's ear lightly, her voice barely a whisper. Mama thought you carried all of us. Maybe that's why you found me. Maybe that's why you stay. For a long time she sat there, reading entry after entry, about Axel's patrols, about how he never left her mother's side when she was sick, about the nights he would stand in the hallway until dawn, as though watching over the house itself. Each word painted the same truth. Her mother had seen Axel as more than a protector. He was a silent witness, a keeper of love, a living thread that tied their fractured family together. The deeper Lena read, the more she felt her mother's presence pressing in around her. It was in the hush of the stable, in the scent of the scarf still draped across her shoulders, in the way Axel's steady breath matched her own. Her mother's words were no longer just ink on paper. They were alive, in Axel's eyes, in his weight against her lap, in the quiet vow that seemed to pass between them each time she whispered his name. Her tears fell silently onto the page, leaving tiny dark marks, but she didn't close the book. Instead, she read them aloud to Axel, each word trembling, her voice breaking but determined. She called you a guardian. That means you're still guarding her through me. Axel's eyes glowed in the moonlight as he looked at her, unblinking. His breath huffed against her hand as though sealing her words. In that moment, Lena didn't feel like she was only reading the journal. She was reliving it, with Axel carrying the memories not as a story, but as truth still alive in his veins. The night stretched on. Outside, the farmhouse loomed like a prison of shadows, but here in the stable, Lena felt something different, something like freedom. She was no longer just a frightened child. She was her mother's daughter, chosen, held, guarded. When she finally closed the journal, her voice broke into a whisper, fragile but certain. You're not just Mama's dog, Axel. You're mine too. And as long as you're here, she is too. The German shepherd exhaled slowly, his weight pressing into her side, his body curled around her small frame like an unspoken vow. Together they sat in the quiet stable, child, guardian, and the echo of a mother's love, woven together into something unbreakable. The farmhouse wore midnight like a shroud. Crickets hummed through cracked window frames. The wind rattled the loose gutter with a tired metallic groan. Inside, the silence sagged heavy, until a scrape of chair legs broke it. Richard Cole sat hunched at the kitchen table, shadow long across the peeling linoleum. A half-empty bottle glimmered beneath the single bulb. His hand shook as he poured another glass. Liquor burning down, but never easing, the truth pressing into his ribs. Debts he couldn't pay, men he couldn't keep away, and a future as barren as the fields outside. The phone sat beside him, cord tangled, an old rotary relic. He had stared at it for hours, until despair stripped him of pride. Finally, he lifted the receiver. Each click of the dial felt like a coffin nail. On the third ring, a gravelly voice answered. Briggs. Richard's throat tightened. It's me, Richard Cole. A rasping chuckle followed. Thought you'd drunk yourself dead. What do you want? Richard clenched his jaw. He hated that laugh, the sound of a man who profited on the broken. But hate didn't change anything. I've got a dog, trained, strong. You'll want him. Briggs lit a cigarette. You sound desperate. I like to be desperate. What's the price? Richard's knuckles whitened on the table. Upstairs, Lena slept, unaware. He swallowed hard. $500. Take the dog. Silence. Then Briggs's laugh, sharp and knowing. 500. For a mutt, unless you mean the shepherd, the one you used to work with. Richard closed his eyes. He didn't say the name, but silence confirmed it. Briggs exhaled smoke into the line. Now that's a prize. A canine washout. Strong bloodlines. Still got fire. He'll fetch more than 500 where I'm taking him. 500, Richard snapped. That's the deal. Done, Briggs said coldly. But when I take him, he's mine. You don't change your mind. Click. Richard stared at the dead receiver, bile in his throat. He downed another drink, but the burn couldn't erase the image of amber eyes, steady, knowing. Eyes that had once dragged him from alleys and knives, that had saved his life more times than he could count. And now he had sold them. From upstairs came a faint creak, Lena turning in her sleep. Richard pressed his palms to his face, but guilt pressed harder. 500, he muttered. Just 500. It didn't sound like justification. It sounded like surrender. Outside, in the stable, Axel lifted his head, ears pricking at something unseen. Some instinct told him his fate had just been sealed. The eavesdropper. The old farmhouse was never truly silent. But tonight, the sound that shattered the stillness was not the wind. It was her father's voice. Lena lay curled on her attic bed, her mother's scarf wrapped around her shoulders, when the rumble of words reached her ears. At first she thought it was only the house settling. Then the cadence broke through. Angry, tired words. Words soaked in drink. She crept down the narrow staircase, bare feet silent as she pressed herself to the wall. At the bottom step, the glow of the single bulb spilled from the kitchen. Her father's voice cracked the air. $500. Take the dog. The words froze her. She clutched the railing until her knuckles whitened. Another voice answered, low and rough, echoing from the receiver. K9. Strong blood. Worth more. Then Richard's voice again, sharp and final. Tomorrow night. Bring cash. Her knees buckled. Tomorrow night. He was selling Axel. The world tilted. She pressed her fist to her mouth to keep from crying out. Betrayal clawed at her chest. Not just that he was selling a dog, but her dog. The only protector she had left since Mama died. The one who blocked the belt that night, who stood in the doorway like a shield. Through the stair crack, she saw her father hunched over the table, face buried in his hands. The bottle gleamed beside him, half drained. For one fleeting second she pitied him. Then the words echoed again. Take the dog. Her gaze drifted to the window. Out there, under the moonlight, Axel was awake. She longed to run to him, to bury her face in his fur. But fear kept her rooted. Fear of her father's anger. Fear of emptiness if she revealed she knew. She drew Mama's scarf tight. Her mother's words from the journal whispered, This dog is not just an animal. He is a guardian. A guardian, and now her father was giving him away. Tears spilled as she pressed her face into her knees. Fear held her still, but beneath it something fiercer stirred, a spark, the same spark she felt when Axel shielded her, the same spark when she read her mother's words aloud in the stable. She rose quietly, retreating upstairs. In her room, she pulled the journal from under her pillow, hugging it to her chest. Sleep never came. Her mind replayed the words again and again. Tomorrow night, bring cash. Tomorrow, they will come for Axel, unless she stopped it. The Midnight Vow. The farmhouse slept in uneasy silence, but Lena's heart was too loud. The thought of Axel gone pressed against her chest like chains. She couldn't lie in bed, not tonight. She slipped from the attic, scarf around her shoulders, each step a risk of waking her father. His snores rumbled faintly below. She eased open the back door, its groans swallowed by the wind. Cold air rushed in, silvering the yard under the thin moon. Barefoot, she ran across the dew-soaked grass. The stable loomed, dark and familiar. Inside, the scent of hay and earth wrapped her like a blanket. "Axel," she whispered. The shepherd was already awake. He rose with a steady sweep of his tail, eyes glowing in the dimness. She collapsed into the straw beside him, throwing her arms around his neck. Sobs tore free as she pressed her face into his fur. "I won't let them take you. I promise." Axel stood still, then lowered his head, pressing his muzzle against her shoulder. His weight grounded her, his warmth seeping into her bones. Her sobs softened into whispers. "Papa wants to sell you. I heard him. But you're mine. You're Mama's. You're not theirs to give away." His tail brushed once, slow and deliberate, like the closing of a vow. He nudged her palm until she opened her fingers, then pressed his head firmly into them. "You're the only one who listens," she breathed. She pulled Mama's journal from under her arm and held it against Axel's side. "Mama knew you were special. She trusted you. And now I do too." Axel shifted, curling around her until she was cocooned in straw and warmth. A low growl rumbled in his chest, ears angled toward the farmhouse, as though he too had heard the bargain made inside. Lena buried herself deeper against him. "He can try," she whispered fiercely. "But I won't let him take you. Not ever." At last, exhaustion stole over her. Her breathing slowed against his chest, her small body nestled into his. Axel remained awake, watchful. His eyes glinted in the dark, sharp and unblinking. If Richard Cole thought the dog would be sold easily, he had not reckoned with this. A child's love bound to the loyalty of a guardian. And beneath the stable roof, that bond only grew stronger. The storm rolled in fast, dragging a curtain of black across the prairie sky. Thunder cracked, shaking the rotting beams of the farmhouse. Rain came hard and cold, rattling the windows in a relentless rhythm. Inside, whiskey soured the air. Richard staggered through the kitchen, bottle in hand, boots heavy on warped boards. His mutters spilled curses, debts, failure, a world that had given him nothing but loss. But his rage sought a target. That target waited in the stable. Axel had been there all day, silent, steady, a reminder of better years, when Richard had worn a badge, when the shepherd had been his partner. But now, Richard saw only defiance. He remembered the night Axel had stood between him and the child. The thought burned hotter than liquor. He stumbled into the yard, rain soaking him instantly. With a kick, he flung the stable door open. Axel lifted his head, amber eyes calm, watchful. "Out!" Richard barked, words slurred. Training never left a K9. Axel obeyed, padding forward, rain slicking his coat. Richard fumbled with the rusted chain, clamping it around the collar. "You think you run this house?" he spat, dragging the shepherd into the yard. He tied the chain to the fence by the withered apple tree, shoving Axel once for good measure. The dog did not retaliate. He never would. "Stay there." Richard staggered back into the house, the door slamming behind him. Axel stood alone in the storm. Rain plastered his fur, mud sucking at his paws. He lifted his head toward the attic window, where a faint glow seeped through the curtain. Upstairs, Lena froze at the sound of rattling chains. She rushed to the window, yanking the curtain aside. What she saw made her small frame tremble. Axel, her guardian, her friend, lashed to the fence, rain hammering his proud body. Water streamed from his whiskers. His eyes, unblinking, fixed on her window. She pressed her palm to the glass. No. The word was swallowed by thunder. Tears blurred her vision, rain streaks and sorrow blending together. She wanted to run to him, to rip the chain free, but fear held her. Fear of the belt. Fear of his eyes when the drink turned cruel. So she stayed, forehead pressed to the glass, whispering, "I'm sorry." Lightning lit the yard, painting Axel in white fire, like a sentinel carved from storm, enduring punishment with dignity. The child's decision. Hours dragged. Richard's snores rumbled below, bottle still clutched in his hand. But Lena never moved from the window. She watched Axel sink slowly into the mud, his gaze never leaving hers. His chest rose steady, unbowed by rain. The sight cut deep. He had once stood between her and a blow, and now he endured another for her sake. The promise she had whispered before returned. "I won't let them take you." She looked down at the scarf in her lap, her mother's scarf, faint with perfume. Mama would have gone to him. Mama would never have let him suffer alone. Her bare feet touched the floor. The boards creaked, but the storm drowned them out. Wrapping the scarf around her shoulders like armor, Lena slipped down the stairs. In the kitchen, Richard slumped in his chair, lost to whiskey. She pushed the back door open. Rain lashed her face, wind tearing at her dress, but she didn't stop. "Axel!" she cried, though the storm swallowed her voice. The shepherd was already on his feet, ears pricked. His eyes glowed in the lightning as she ran across the yard. She dropped to her knees in the mud, fumbling at the clasp with trembling hands. "I'm here," she whispered. The lock bit her fingers, rust tearing at her nails, but she didn't stop. Axel pressed his weight against her shoulder, steadying her. "You saved me," she said, tugging harder. "Now it's my turn." With one last twist, the chain gave way. Metal clattered into the mud, lost in thunder. Axel shook himself, sending water flying. Lena slipped the scarf from her shoulders, tying it around his neck. Too fragile for such a strong animal, but it was all she had to give. Her mother's memory, wrapped around her guardian. "There," she whispered. "Mama's with you now." Axel lowered his head, pressing his forehead against hers. Rain poured, lightning split the sky, but in that moment there was stillness. "Thunder can't scare me anymore," Lena whispered, voice breaking. "Not when you're here." Her tears mingled with rain. She had spent years shrinking, hiding. But here in the storm, clutching Axel's soaked fur, something shifted. She wasn't just a frightened child. She was someone making a promise. "I swear," she said, fierce despite her trembling, "I'll protect you. I'll never let them take you. You're mine, you're Mama's, your family." The words fell into the storm like seeds. Axel pressed his muzzle into her shoulder, sealing the vow. His low, steady rumble was not a growl, but an answer. Together they stood, drenched but unbroken. Lightning lit them like a portrait. Child and dog, fragile and fierce, defying the night. "You saved me that night in the kitchen," she whispered. "So now I'll be brave for you." The rain softened, thunder retreating. The scarf clung to Axel's chest, a ribbon of defiance in the storm. Lena pressed her cheek to his head. Mama would want me to protect you. And I will. The farmhouse loomed, Richard still asleep in his chair. His shadow would fall again when he woke, but tonight, Lena felt it weaken. There was something stronger at her side. She whispered once more, "No matter what happens, I'll never let you go." And in the quiet that followed, Axel pressed closer, his weight a vow of his own. Morning came, but it did not bring peace. The storm had passed, leaving the farmhouse wrapped in damp silence. The yard was a churn of mud and puddles, the apple tree dripping water like a clock counting down. Inside, the air smelled of wet wood and stale whiskey. Lena stirred in her attic bed, heavy with exhaustion. She had barely slept, clutching her mother's scarf around her shoulders, replaying the promise whispered into Axel's fur. That memory gave her courage, until another sound shattered the silence. Not thunder, an engine. It rumbled closer, coughing smoke, rattling the windows. Lena rushed to the attic window and froze. A truck pulled into the yard, tires spraying mud, rusted chains clinked on the flatbed. Behind the wheel sat Marlowe Briggs. He killed the engine, climbed out slowly and deliberately. A broad man in a frayed denim jacket, boots sinking into mud, a cigarette tucked behind one ear. His eyes were flat, cold, seeing nothing but value. "Richard," he called, gravel scraping his throat. The farmhouse door opened. Richard stumbled out, shirt wrinkled, face unshaven, bitterness clinging like smoke. He straightened slightly, remembering the bargain. Marlowe. The two men faced each other in drizzle and silence until Marlowe spoke. "Where's the dog?" Richard gestured toward the stable. "In there." Lena pressed her fist to her mouth. Inside the stable, Axel shifted, paws scraping dirt, sensing what was coming. Marlowe pushed the stable door open. A low growl rumbled from within. Axel stood stiff, fur bristling, the scarf clinging damp to his chest like a banner. His amber eyes locked on the intruder. Marlowe squinted through the smoke curling from his cigarette, studying Axel like merchandise. Good build, strong chest. Teeth? Axel bared them. Marlowe's lips twisted. "Yeah, he'll work." Richard stepped forward quickly. "He's obedient. I used to be a police K9. "Used to be?" Marlowe's gaze was sharp. "He still listens," Richard muttered. "Just older." Marlowe spat into the mud. "Older people don't matter if he pulls weight. A beast like this'll fetch more than 500 once he's broke." The word sliced Lena like a blade. Broke. To him, Axel wasn't family. He was property. Marlowe flicked his cigarette into the mud. His voice was final. "I'll take him tomorrow." Axel growled, steady, unafraid. For the first time, Marlowe's expression shifted. Not fear, but irritation. He turned back toward the truck. "Have him ready. I don't waste time." He climbed into the cab. The engine roared. The truck lumbered away, spitting mud. Silence returned, sharp and heavy. Axel stood where he was, muscles taut, eyes fixed on the road long after Marlowe vanished. From her window, Lena whispered, "He's not taking you. I won't let him." Her legs shook, but she ran. Down the stairs, past the stench of whiskey. Richard sat at the kitchen table, clutching a wad of bills, Marlowe's down payment. He held it like both salvation and poison. "Papa!" Her voice cracked sharp, startling even herself. "You can't let him take Axel. He's not yours to sell." Richard's head snapped up, eyes bloodshot. "Not mine." His voice dropped to a dangerous growl. "I raised him, trained him. Fed him when you were still in diapers. If I say he goes, he goes." Lena's fists balled. "No, he belongs to Mama. He belongs to me. He saved me. From you." The words slipped out like glass shattering. Richard surged to his feet, chair legs screeching. His shadow swallowed her small frame. "Don't you ever speak to me like that again." Tears blurred her eyes, but her voice didn't waver. "That man will kill him. You know he will." Richard slammed his fist on the table. "You don't understand. We need the money. We don't survive without it." "I don't care about money," she cried. "I care about Axel." For a heartbeat, the room trembled with her words. Richard stared at her, his little girl no longer silent. Then, from outside, a bark cracked the air, sharp, commanding. Axel stood near the porch, body rigid, eyes burning. Before Richard could speak, a chuckle rolled from the yard. Marlowe. He hadn't left after all. He leaned against the truck, cigarette smoke curling, eyes glinting with amusement. "The girl's got more fight in her than you, Richard." "You can't take him!" Lena shouted through the door. Marlowe tilted his head, smirk widening. "And what will you do, little bird? Run away?" His voice mocked, low and dangerous. "I will," she cried. "I'll hide him. I'll run." Marlowe laughed, harsh as gravel. "Children don't get to decide what men do with property." "He's not property." Lena's voice cut the air. "He's family. Mama said he's a guardian. He belongs to us, not you." For the first time, Marlowe's smirk faltered. He crushed his cigarette under his boot. His words were meant for Richard as much as Lena. "Keep that girl on a leash, or she'll ruin the deal." Axel barked again, a whip-crack sound that made Marlowe's eyes narrow. Then he turned to the truck. "Tomorrow. Have him ready." The engine roared, and this time he was gone. Silence settled, sharper than the storm. Lena trembled in the doorway, fists clenched, tears streaking her cheeks. Richard stood behind her, clutching the bills like a shield. 500, he muttered. "Enough to pay him. Enough to keep us alive another month." "Enough to kill Axel," Lena shot back. Richard's jaw tightened. "We don't have a choice." "I understand enough," Lena cried. "Money won't keep me safe. Axel does. Money won't stop you when you're angry. Axel does. Mama trusted him, not you." Richard's fist slammed the table, bottle tipping, whiskey spilling dark across the wood. "Enough. You think I don't know what I've become? This dog is the only thing left worth anything." The words broke her. She spun and fled into the yard. Axel was already at the stable door, tense and pacing. She threw her arms around him, burying her face in his fur. "I won't let them take you," she whispered. "Even if I have to run away." Axel pressed his muzzle into her shoulder, steady and grounding. She clutched the scarf, now damp with rain and tears. The farmhouse door slammed. Richard stepped into the yard, bills stuffed deep in his pocket. "Get away from him, Lena." She didn't move. "I said get away." She held Axel tighter, eyes blazing through her tears. "No. If you sell him, you'll lose me too." Richard froze. The words hit deeper than any scream. For a moment, the fight drained from his shoulders. His mouth opened, but no words came. His eyes flicked toward the road, then back to the child and the dog. Then his jaw hardened. He turned on his heel, muttering as he stomped back inside. "Tomorrow. It'll be done tomorrow." The screen door slammed. Lena sat in the mud, clutching Axel. The shepherd circled once, then lay beside her, his head on her lap, eyes fixed on the farmhouse. Not soft now, steel, sharp, unblinking. Lena stroked his fur, whispering, "You're not just a dog. You're my guardian." Axel's ears twitched, his gaze never leaving the house. In the silence, something older than bargains was sealed. The vow of a child and her dog against a storm yet to come. The attic smelled of dust and old wood, of memories pressed into floorboards that groaned with every breath of wind. A single candle burned beside Lena, its flame throwing uneasy shadows across the beams overhead. She sat cross-legged on a faded quilt, her mother's leather journal open in her lap. Her finger traced the last entry, the ink pressed deeper into the paper, as if her mother had known these words would matter more than any others. Axel's loyalty cannot be bought. He protects those he chooses. When darkness falls, he will not abandon you. Remember, my daughter, some guardians are not born, they are chosen. Tears blurred the page. She hugged the journal to her chest, whispering the words again until they felt like a vow. Axel had chosen her, and tomorrow her father planned to sell him. No, Lena whispered. The decision hardened inside her. She would not beg anymore. She would take Axel and run. She gathered what little she could carry. The journal, the lavender-scented scarf her mother had left behind, a bruised apple, a slice of bread wrapped in cloth. The school satchel hung light against her shoulder, but to Lena it felt like armor. Downstairs, Richard's drunken snores drifted up through the floorboards. She crept past his door, glimpsing his slack face in the chair, the empty bottle at his feet. For a heartbeat, pity tugged at her. But she thought of Axel chained in the rain, and Marlowe's sneer, and pity turned to resolve. The back door groaned open. Night air swept in, cold, damp, smelling of earth. The stable crouched against the fields, its roof patched with rusting tin. Somewhere inside, Axel waited. She crossed the yard barefoot, mud pulling at her steps. The moon slipped through clouds, silvering the fields. When she reached the stable doors, glowing eyes met her through the cracks. His ears pricked. He was awake. Lena dropped to her knees, fumbling at the rope. "It's okay, boy. We're leaving tonight." Her small hands shook, slick with rain. Axel pressed his nose into her shoulder, steadying her. Then the storm gave voice to something worse than thunder. "Lena!" Her father's shout cut through the night. Lightning revealed his figure staggering from the house, rain plastering his shirt to his chest, a belt dangling from one fist, his face twisted in fury. "You sneaky little brat," Richard roared. "What do you think you're doing?" Lena pressed against Axel's side, gripping the rope. "I won't let you take him. You can't sell him." The belt rose. "You'll learn not to disobey me." A growl rolled from Axel's chest, low and primal. He stepped forward, placing himself between girl and man, ears flat, teeth bared. Thunder cracked in answer. Richard faltered, belt trembling in his grip. "Stand down," he barked. "That's an order." But Axel didn't move. His gaze locked on Richard, steady and unyielding. "He's not yours anymore," Lena cried through tears. "He's mine. Mama said he's a guardian. He chose me." The words struck harder than the storm. For a heartbeat, Richard froze, staring at his daughter, at the fire in her eyes, the echo of a woman he had loved and lost. Lightning split the sky. Axel barked, a single explosive sound that sent Richard stumbling back. For the first time, he saw not just a dog, but a soldier, a protector forged in loyalty. "You already lost Mama." Lena's voice rose, ragged and fierce. "Don't make me lose him too." Richard's hand sagged. The belt hung slack at his side. Rain poured over them all, but the true storm raged in the space between father and child. Axel stood firm, his growl vibrating against the thunder. Lena clung to him, small hand buried in his soaked fur. Together they faced Richard, a fragile child and a steadfast guardian, daring him to strike. And as the storm howled over the farmhouse, the world seemed to pause, holding its breath for what he would choose. The storm raged as though the heavens themselves were watching. Rain lashed the farmhouse yard, each drop needling into skin, each gust of wind howling like a warning. Lightning carved jagged scars across the sky, revealing the tableau in the mud. A father with a belt raised, a daughter clutching her only protector, and a German shepherd standing like a wall of muscle and will between them. The belt hissed through the air. Lena flinched, burying her face against Axel's wet shoulder. But before leather could strike flesh, the shepherd moved. Axel lunged forward with a force that shook the ground, his snarl rolling through the storm like thunder. Richard staggered back, boots slipping in the mud, the belt faltering in his hand. "Back!" he roared, but his voice cracked, drowned by the storm and the guttural growl vibrating from Axel's chest. The dog did not attack recklessly. Every step was deliberate, controlled. Echoes of the training drilled into him years ago. He advanced one pace at a time, his eyes unblinking, every muscle taut with restraint. He was not out of control. He was in command. Lena lifted her head, tears and rain mingling on her cheeks. Beneath her hands, Axel's body trembled, not with fear, but with resolve. For the first time in her young life, she saw her father stumble, not from drink or exhaustion, but because his fury had met something greater. Richard's breath came ragged. Memories surged. Dark alleys, shouted commands. Axel leaping toward danger with fearless discipline. That same discipline glared back at him now, but turned against him. "You dare," Richard whispered. "After all I did for you, you dare." Axel's growl rumbled in answer, steady and low, vibrating through the storm like a bell tolling judgment. Richard lifted the belt again, but Axel moved first. With trained precision he pivoted, dodged the strike, and slammed his shoulder into Richard's thigh. The man toppled backward into the mud, the belt slipping from his hand. Axel did not maul him. He planted himself firmly in the muck, chest low, teeth bared, issuing a single command of his own: "Enough." Richard's back hit the ground with a sickening thud. Mud splattered across his face as lightning flashed overhead, Axel's shadow looming over him like a sentinel. "Stop, Papa," Lena cried, her voice trembling but fierce. "Please stop." Richard's eyes darted from his daughter to the dog. He saw the scarf of his late wife clutched around the girl's shoulders, glowing faintly in the stormlight, like a thread tying past to present. "You think he'll save you?" he spat, forcing himself onto his elbows. "He's just a dog." "No," Lena's voice cracked but held firm. "He's more than that. Mama knew. And I know too." Richard lurched to his feet, fury twisting his face. He grabbed for the belt, but Axel lunged again. Not at the man, but at the weapon. His jaws clamped onto the strap, ripping it from Richard's grip. With one sharp twist, he flung it into the mud, where it sank beneath the rain. Thunder cracked overhead, as if the sky itself had passed judgment. The belt had always been Richard's power. Now it lay buried in the muck, discarded by the very creature he once commanded. Axel stepped forward again, shoulders squared, stance precise, his growl a steady warning. A line had been drawn. Richard's chest heaved. For the first time in years, he felt small in his own yard, not because of the storm, but because of the unyielding gaze of a creature who refused to bow. And in that gaze, he glimpsed himself, Not a master, not a father, but a man who had fallen too far. The thunder rolled away, leaving only the hammering of rain. Lena clung to Axel, her cheek pressed against his soaked fur. Her small voice rose above the storm. "He's not afraid of you anymore, Papa, and neither am I." The words struck harder than any blow. Richard staggered, his fury unraveling into something deeper. Grief, guilt, the unbearable weight of years lost to bitterness. His lips parted, but no words came. Only the storm spoke. "You already lost Mom," Lena cried. "Don't make me lose him too." Richard froze. His jaw clenched, fists curling not in rage, but in a desperate attempt to hold himself together. He looked for escape, but the storm held him here, face to face with the truth he had buried. "You don't understand," he rasped. "You're just a child." "I understand enough," she shouted back. "I understand that he's all I have left. You're supposed to protect me, but you don't. He does. If you take him away, then I have no one. And I'll hate you, Papa. I'll hate you forever." The storm seemed to hush for her words. Richard staggered back, her voice cutting deeper than any strike Axel could deliver. Hate. That word shattered something inside him. He looked at his daughter, the last living piece of Elena, and felt the walls of his anger begin to crumble. Her sobs softened to hiccuping breaths. "Please, Papa. You already took Mama away when you stopped being kind. Don't do this." The words dragged him back through time. Elena's laughter in the kitchen. Lena toddling with unsteady steps. Axel lying at the door, watching everything with quiet vigilance. A world once whole. "I didn't take her away," Richard whispered, though he sounded unconvinced. "She got sick. There was nothing I could do." "You could have loved her more," Lena said, her voice soft but piercing. "You could have loved me more, but you chose anger instead." Richard's knees buckled. He fell into the mud, rain washing down his face, his hands trembling as they dug into the earth. For the first time in years, tears carved through the grime. "I didn't know how," he sobbed. "After she was gone, I didn't know how to do any of it without her." Axel's growl faded into silence. The shepherd lowered his head slightly, as though acknowledging, not an enemy now, but a man stripped bare. Lena, trembling, knelt before her father. She reached for his hands. At first he didn't move, paralyzed by shame. But when her small fingers wrapped around his knuckles, something inside him gave way. "Please, Papa," she whispered. "I need him, but I need you too. I don't want to lose both." Richard lifted his head. In her eyes he saw Eleanor, the same fire, the same stubborn love. He saw the family he had nearly destroyed, and the fragile thread of hope being offered to him now. "I can't lose you," he rasped. Lena leaned forward, her forehead resting against his. "Then don't make me lose him. Please." His breath came in shudders. The storm rumbled, but within the yard another storm began to quiet. He released a broken sob, clutching her hands as though they were the only thing keeping him afloat. Behind them, Axel stepped closer, his muzzle brushing Richard's shoulder in a gentle reminder of a bond once shared. Richard turned, meeting the dog's eyes in the stormlight. For the first time in years, he saw not defiance, but loyalty, waiting to be reclaimed. The belt lay forgotten, the rain erasing its outline. Richard bowed his head, tears falling freely now. "I can't do this anymore," he whispered. "Then don't," Lena answered. The words pierced him like lightning. For years, his life had been defined by loss and rage. Now his daughter offered him a choice. Stop. He collapsed fully to his knees, his head bowed, the storm washing him clean. Lena stepped closer, placing her hand on his sleeve. He flinched, then slowly turned his palm to grasp hers. His rough fingers clung to her small hand, as though to driftwood in a flood. The three of them stood entwined in the storm, man, child, and guardian. Lightning lit their faces, a father broken, a daughter reaching, a dog anchoring them both. For once, no one spoke. The storm raged on, but inside the circle they had formed, something fragile had taken root. Not forgiveness yet, but the beginning of it. The storm had passed and left the world washed raw. Puddles held shards of sky like broken mirrors. The air was bright with mud and rain. The farmhouse sagged under what had happened, its roof ticking out a tired rhythm, its rooms swollen with silence. But under that silence, something new vibrated, a fragile hum of change. Richard sat at the kitchen table, clothes damp, hair slicked to his forehead. His calloused hands trembled around the leather-bound journal Lena had carried down from the attic. Candlelight flared against the cracked cover and the swollen pages. He hadn't touched this book since Eleanor died. Drinking was easier than remembering. Rage, easier than grief. Across from him, Lena watched. Small, unyielding, her mother's scarf clutched like armor. Her eyes were reddened but steady, that Elena steadiness that always saw through him. Richard opened the book slowly, as if it could bite. Elena's handwriting unfurled on the first page, precise, curling, intimately familiar. His chest tightened. He traced the ink with his thumb, as if it were scar tissue. "Read it," Lena whispered. Soft, certain. "Please." He cleared his throat. The candle hissed and threw their shadows across the wall. He began, "Axel's loyalty cannot be bought. He protects those he chooses. He is more than a dog. He is a guardian. And one day, when the darkness feels too heavy, he will remind us what it means to be family." The words struck like a blow. His voice failed halfway through. He pressed a hand to his forehead, breathing unevenly. Lena leaned toward the table, fingers white on the wood, as if bracing it, and herself, against another collapse. "That's what Mama wanted," she said, voice trembling but insistent. "Axel protects us, not to be sold, not thrown away." He met her gaze. Her faith was too young for cynicism, and because of that, it was stronger than anything he had left. He flipped farther through the pages. Elena hadn't written like a soldier. She wrote like someone who understood what duty cost. Missions were sketched through a human lens. Axel saving men, finding the lost, never abandoning a call. There were notes about old ways that threaded her family. Guardianship not as superstition, but as practice, as promise. Lena slid around the table and sat beside him. Her damp scarf pooled in her lap. When she leaned cautiously against his arm, and he didn't move away, she let more of her weight rest there. Two sets of eyes moved together across the pages, reading legacy aloud, without sound. Richard froze at an entry. "If I do not survive this sickness, I want Lena to know. She is never alone. Axel carries my trust. My grandmother Celeste still lives in the chapel in the hills. She knows the old ways. When the time comes, they will need her wisdom." Celeste. He had scoffed at that name for years, called her tradition's relics, her counsel meddling. He'd chosen pride over listening. Now, Elena's handwriting rose like a lantern over a road he'd refused to take. He set the journal down and covered his face. "God help me," he said hoarsely. "I should have listened." Lena's small hand found his sleeve. "We still can." He lowered his hands. She didn't flinch. She wasn't pleading now. She was certain. Her certainty frightened him, because it demanded he remember the man he'd been before he broke himself on grief. The house creaked. The walls seemed tired of holding pain. Outside, Axel paced by the window, ears twitching like he could hear a decision forming. Now and then he looked in, amber eyes catching the candlelight. Richard laid his palm on Elena's words, then looked at his daughter, hair tangled, cheeks salt-marked, eyes lit with a fire that had already paid too high a price. "You think we should go to her?" His voice came out low, almost wary. Lena nodded. "Mama wanted it. She said Celeste knows. She said Axel would guide us. If we stay, they'll take him. If we go—" She glanced toward the window where Axel now stood, still as stone. "He'll be safe. Maybe we will too. If we stay, they'll take him." The line cut clean through the soft places he had left. He thought of Marlowe's cold eyes, the way they measured Axel like property. Shame and anger twisted inside him. He pushed up from the chair and paced. His boots squelched mud into the floorboards. At the window, he met Axel's stare, steady, expectant, the look the dog had worn in the field when danger demanded a choice. Axel did not look away. Richard turned back to Lena. She didn't look away either. "We'll go," he said. Lena's breath caught. When the words landed, tears lifted in her eyes. No longer fear, but relief. "Papa, really?" "Yes." His jaw tightened, but the tremor in his voice was surrender, not weakness. "We'll find Celeste." He pressed his palm to the journal. "Your mother wanted it. I should have gone years ago." She threw her arms around his waist. The embrace found him unpracticed. He stood stiff for a heartbeat, then let his arms come around her, awkward and honest. His chin bumped her hair. For the first time since Elena died, he allowed the outline of something beyond regret. At the window, Axel made a sound, low, steady, approving. A sentinel, acknowledging a vow. The choice was spoken. They would leave the farmhouse shadows. They would climb toward the chapel in the hills. Somewhere between ruins and hope, a broken man, a brave child, and a loyal dog would begin again. Morning broke with a quieter kind of quiet, like a breath held, not withheld. Mist lifted off the fields in pale ribbons. The farmhouse behind them seemed smaller already. Richard guided the old cart out of the yard. The wheels creaked over softened earth. Lena sat beside him, wrapped in her mother's scarf, the journal gripped like a compass. A small bundle, bread, water, a couple of tools, shifted in the cart's bed. Axel ran alongside, dew darkening his paws, ears pricked, gaze sweeping the hedgerows. The road ahead wasn't just an escape. It was a pilgrimage. By midday, the sun burned off the mist. The fields flashed with wet light. The journal guided them into a shallow valley, where a stream stitched through stones and willow shade. Water sparked so brightly it seemed the ground bled silver. "This is it," Lena whispered, finger on a page. "Mama called it the purifying stream. She said the water carries away more than dirt." Richard stopped the cart and climbed down. He helped Lena to the bank. Axel trotted ahead and drank, tongue rippling the surface. Richard knelt. The current quivered his reflection into a stranger. Hollow-eyed, liquor-worn, scabbed over with anger. Shame rose hot. He cupped his hands, drew up the water, and threw it over his face. It shocked him cold. When it ran down, something eased, as if grime under the skin had let go. Lena dipped her palms, pressed them to her eyes. "It feels lighter," she murmured. Axel waded forward until the flow reached his chest. He stood, head high, still as if offering himself to the water. Then he looked at Richard, and the look felt like instruction. "Let go." Richard obeyed. Each handful he let fall, he named something he would not carry the same way. Debt, failure, nights of shouting, years of silence. Nothing erased, but edges dulled. He turned and found Lena watching him. Her smile was slight, fragile, and real. A first weight lifted. By afternoon, they climbed into the hills, where the air smelled of pine and damp stone. The path bent around a slope and revealed an oak that commanded the ridge. Its trunk was thick as a room, its bark scarred, its roots gripping the hill like the hands of a giant. "Mama called it the Oak of Memories," Lena said, hushed. "She wrote that if you touch it and close your eyes, you see what you need to remember." Richard tied the reins and approached as if it were an altar. He pressed his palm to the bark. The ridges bit his skin. He closed his eyes. Darkness at first. Then Eleanor laughing, sun in her hair, her voice calling him across a field. The night Lena was born, a fist no bigger than his knuckle closing around him. Not hauntings. Gifts retrieved from the rubble. When he opened his eyes, tears came. He let them trace his face, without shame. Lena reached up and laid both hands on the oak. Her lips moved silently. Her shoulders shook. She lowered her forehead to the bark. When she stepped back, her cheeks were wet, but her eyes glowed. "I saw Mama holding me. Axel was there. She said we were safe." Axel brushed her leg and then nosed Richard's wrist, as if to say, "Remember this, too." The oak had returned something they thought the storm had buried, a usable piece of love. Evening laid long shadows by the time they reached the ridgetop. The sky turned amber, then violet. Half buried in the crown of the hill stood a standing stone, tall as a man and rough with age. Wildflowers flared at its base. Lena read from the journal, voice catching. "The stone is where promises are sealed, where the future is blessed." Richard set his hand on her back and led her forward. The air felt charged, lighter, older. Lena knelt and placed the journal at the stone's foot. "Mama said guardians stand here to choose their path." She looked for Axel. He stepped forward and sat, deliberate as a ceremony, chest lifted, gaze steady on the setting sun. In that stillness lived the entire history of his training and the entire truth of his choosing. He had chosen them. Richard swallowed. His voice came out rough and bare. "I've been a fool. I nearly lost my child. I nearly sold the only creature who remembered what family meant. No more." He looked from Lena to Axel. "I promise. I will not sell him. I will not abandon you. I will try, every day, to be the man she believed I could be." Lena slid her hand into his, and then faced the stone. "I promise to protect him, as he protects me. To remember Mama. To be brave." A breeze rose and lifted her scarf like a banner. Axel pressed his head into her side, sealing the vow. The stone stood silent, but the silence felt like assent. They returned to the cart under a deepening sky pricked with first stars. Richard felt lighter, not because the past was absolved, but because he finally carried something else. Remembrance, promise, the beginnings of hope. Lena leaned against him, the journal hugged to her chest. Axel trotted with the same tireless cadence he'd kept all day, as if he had always known the itinerary. The road no longer led away from despair. It led toward something whole. They reached the chapel as late light combed the hilltop. Its stone walls were moss-streaked, its roofline simple, its presence unbending. A narrow path wound through the trees to its door. As they approached, the air thickened with the quiet an old place keeps when it's waiting for the right footsteps. Axel ranged ahead, circled the building once, then sat at the threshold, as if confirming a perimeter. Ears pricked, eyes fixed. His body said what Lena's heart already knew. This was no ordinary hill, and nothing about this journey was accidental. A figure stepped from the doorway. Celeste. Age in the silver of her hair, and in the fine lines webbing her face. Authority held softly in her spine. Her grey eyes warmed when she saw the girl and the dog. "Lena," she said, voice like a bell rung low. "You have come." Richard halted, jaw tight, unsure of his angle of approach. Lena moved forward with a steadiness that surprised him. Axel at her side, a shield that breathed. She clutched the journal like a talisman and nodded. Celeste studied them for a long heartbeat, then turned and gestured them inside. Stained glass, fractured sunlight across stone. Shelves of books and heirlooms lined the walls. Everything felt witness-worn, like it remembered the hands that had touched it. Celeste's gaze moved to Axel. "And this is the one," she said, voice softening. "The guardian chosen long before the darkness came." Axel sat unmoving. Their eyes met, and Lena felt something pass between them that words would only cheapen. "Your mother believed," Celeste said, kneeling to Lena's height, "that Axel would unite your family when the night pressed hardest. Even in her leaving, she trusted him to guide you home." Richard's eyes went from dog to daughter, to matriarch. A lump rose in his throat, like a stone finally dislodged. Lena laid a hand in Axel's fur. "She knew," she whispered. "Even then, he would protect us." Axel leaned into her palm and then looked up at Richard with a patience that felt like an invitation. They sat on a front pew. Richard hesitated at the end of it, then lowered himself, shoulders rounded under the old weight. Lena kept one hand on Axel and one on the journal. "You've traveled far," Celeste said, "not only across land but through pain and fear. What you learned is simple and often forgotten. Love is not given. It is chosen. Guardianship isn't ownership. It's a bond, tested, proven, renewed." She looked at Richard, then at Lena. "Your mother knew that, even when darkness came into your home, one would stand firm. Axel has done this. He carries her trust. He has helped you find each other." Richard's hand found Lena's. The touch was tentative, then sure. Tears came without permission. "I thought I could fix it by force," he said, "by holding tighter. But she left us a guide. I didn't see it." Lena closed her fingers over his. "We're not alone anymore," she said. Axel bumped Richard's knuckles, then pressed into Lena's shoulder. He wasn't just a companion. He was a bridge. Celeste stood at the lectern, a hand resting on wood polished by decades. "The past does not dictate the future," she said, "but it does leave a path. You have walked it with courage. Axel has walked it with you. Now continue, not as master and animal, but as guardians of one another. Richard nodded. I understand. He exhaled like someone opening a locked room. I will not let what I did yesterday decide how I love today. Lena tucked herself closer to Axel. Her voice, when it came, was steady for the first time. We're ready, she said. Together, Celeste smiled, a small lifting at the edges that made the room warmer. Then your path begins here, she said. Axel is your guardian, but he is also your reminder of who you are, what you stand for, how love survives the worst weather. Axel's tail swept once, precise, like a salute. Lena's eyes shone. Richard's shoulders eased. The chapel air seemed lighter. The shadows retreated to corners. Outside, the first stars kindled, and the glass caught them. The journey hadn't ended. It had changed its key. Each stop, stream, oak, stone, chapel, had returned something they needed to carry on. Cleansing, memory, vow, meaning. They stepped out into the evening. The door fell shut behind them, with a soft, reverent thud. Axel stood at the top of the steps, head high, surveying the darkening world as if to say, I will guard you, whatever comes. Lena slipped her hand into Richard's. We'll do this together. Yes, he said, giving her hand a careful squeeze. Together. Axel led them down the hill. Behind them the chapel kept its light. Ahead the road kept unfolding, no longer the road away from grief, but the one you take when you've decided to live. The first light of dawn broke over the chapel hill, softening the stone walls with a pale golden glow. Mist curled along the path, and the trees whispered secrets in the morning breeze. Axel's paws pressed into the dew-soaked earth as he paced, nose twitching at sense of danger and change. Beside him, Lena clutched her mother's journal to her chest. Richard stood close, shoulders squared, jaw set. They had survived storms, secrets, and nights of fear, but nothing could prepare them for what was coming. The silence was taut as a bowstring, until the rumble of an engine rose from the valley. Marlowe's truck emerged through the mist, its dark frame swallowing the light. Lena's stomach clenched. She had dreaded this moment, but the reality struck harder than any imagining. Marlowe stepped out, tall and cold, his leather jacket gleaming in the headlights. His voice cut the morning like a blade. Morning, I've come for what's mine. Axel braced, muscles coiling. Lena pressed her hand to his flank. Richard moved protectively in front of them. From the chapel doorway, Celeste appeared, bathed in early light. She raised a hand, and the air thickened with a force Marlowe could not name. Even the stones seemed to hum. This is sacred ground, she said calmly, though her voice carried command. Axel is not yours to take. Marlowe sneered. You think an old superstition will stop me? Celeste's eyes narrowed. This is not superstition. It is tradition, protection, and choice. Axel chooses, and he has chosen them. Axel planted his paws into the earth, head high, eyes locked on Marlowe with quiet intensity. He did not growl. He simply stood, unmovable. Richard's voice was steady. You underestimate what you don't understand. Axel protects the ones who belong to him. He belongs here. Lena stepped forward, her small hand firm on Axel's back. You can't take him. He saved me. Now it's my turn to protect him. The sacred air pressed down. Marlowe faltered, words catching in his throat. For the first time, his confidence wavered. After a long, taut silence, he stepped back. This isn't over, he spat, retreating to his truck. The engine roared, and the mist swallowed him whole. Lena collapsed to her knees, burying her face against Axel's neck. Tears came, tears of relief. Richard knelt beside her, hand steady on her shoulder. "We're safe," he whispered. "For now. And Axel, he's ours. He's chosen us." Celeste's hand rested on Richard's back. "You have done well. Not because of strength alone, but because of loyalty and courage. The bond between guardian and family cannot be bought. It must be earned." Axel circled them, then sat firmly at their side, tail sweeping the ground. The vow was sealed. By midday, the farmhouse yard was alive with color and sound. Garlands of flowers hung from the porch beams, tables overflowed with bread and fruit, and the air filled with fiddle and drum. Villagers gathered for the Festival of Renewal, a celebration of survival and unity after hardship. Lena rode Axel proudly around the yard, her mother's green scarf fluttering behind her like a banner. Children laughed and chased his strides, and Axel slowed for them, careful and patient. From the farmhouse steps, Richard watched. His eyes softened as he shook hands with neighbors, bridging old divides with nods and apologies. One by one, the distance between them faded. Celeste approached Lena with a hand-woven scarf patterned with rivers and oaks. "This marks not just survival," she said, her voice carrying through the crowd, "but renewal of trust. This scarf has been passed for generations to those who understand guardianship is sacred." Lena wrapped it around her neck, fingers trembling. Axel nudged her, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Together, they paused at a small altar. Lena poured water over Axel's paws, sealing his role as protector. The villagers watched quietly, reverence mingling with joy. Richard bent to help children tie ribbons on branches. For the first time, his sternness softened into care. Lena laughed, her scarf gleaming in the sun, while Axel carried children patiently, his steady gait drawing more laughter. Under the great oak, Celeste gathered them close. "Remember, strength is not the measure. It is loyalty, love, and the courage to stand together. Axel protects because he chooses to, and you have proven worthy of that trust." Axel touched his muzzle to Lena, then Richard. The crowd applauded, and the land itself seemed to breathe with relief. For the first time, Lena felt unburdened. They were not merely surviving, they were beginning anew. That night, silence returned. Lanterns faded, the orchard whispered in the dark, and stars burned across the sky. On the porch, Axel sat tall, his fur shimmering under starlight. Every sound, the owl's call, the creak of wood, the rustle of grass, passed through his vigilant mind. He was calm, but watchful, as he had always been. Lena stepped beside him, clutching her mother's journal. She touched his shoulder, whispering, "You saved me. You saved us." Her voice trembled with gratitude. Axel nudged her hand, amber eyes catching the stars. Richard joined quietly, standing behind them. "All these years," he said softly, "we thought protection meant fear. But Axel showed us. It's loyalty and the courage to stand where it matters." Lena pressed her forehead to Axel's fur. "You've always chosen us, and I'll always choose you." Axel lifted his muzzle to the sky and released a long, soft howl. Not sorrow, not alarm, but a pledge. The sound rippled through the night, a declaration of eternal guardianship. The stars seemed to shimmer in answer. "Eternal," Lena whispered. The word captured everything: survival, love, the bond unbroken. Richard rested a hand on her shoulder. "He's ours, and he always will be." Axel sat, unwavering, silhouetted against the starlit sky, chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. His howl lingered in memory, a solemn promise that guardianship is not fleeting. Some guardians never leave. They choose, they protect, and their vow is eternal. As the night settles and Axel keeps his quiet vigil, we're reminded of the extraordinary bond that can exist between humans and their dogs. German shepherds, with their unwavering loyalty, intelligence, and instinct to protect, teach us about patience, trust, and the kind of love that asks for nothing in return. They become more than companions. They are guardians of our hearts, silent witnesses to our fears and joys, always present even when we don't notice. Stories like Lena and Axel's show that connection is not just about ownership or training. It's about respect, understanding, and being seen by a creature who chooses to stand by your side, no matter the storm. If you've ever felt that quiet longing to understand your own dog more deeply, there are gentle ways to explore that connection, resources, guides, or communities that can help you notice the subtle signals, the little gestures, and the extraordinary loyalty your companion offers every day. One that I've found thoughtful and heart-centered is worth a peek. It's not about rules or performance, just connection. Sometimes, the greatest gift we can give and receive is simply paying attention. Take a moment tonight to sit with your dog and let the trust grow quietly, naturally, like Axel's eternal promise to Lena.